This is an LA Times Studios podcast.
Chris Goffard here at LA Times Studios. Thanks for joining us on Crimes of the Times. In today's episode, the murder of Elizabeth Short, a case more commonly known as the Black Dahlia. It's the most famous unsolved murder in Los Angeles history, with a wild variety of suspects, including one that detectives missed for years. Tell us what you think in the comments below. At a drugstore in Long Beach, a jobless young woman named Elizabeth Short used to be seen frequently, lingering at the counter. Her hair was dyed jet black, matching the funereal hue of the clothes she favored. It was here that she acquired a playful nickname that would fuel her long, macabre afterlife. People called her the Black Dahlia. It was a riff on a Raymond Chandler movie, a film noir called The Blue Dahlia that was popular at the time. Cops and reporters discovered Elizabeth Short's nickname after her mutilated body was found on January 15, 1947, in a weedy lot in South Los Angeles. The Black Dahlia made her sound like some kind of rare, poisonous bloom, a night creature on intimate terms with death. There is no proof she even knew of the name. It derived from noir fantasy and helped transform her into noir fantasy. Writers would tailor her story to fit a femme fatale archetype. She was often described as an aspiring actress. Her death played as a cautionary tale parents might tell daughters who dreamed of taking a bus to Hollywood to find stardom. The myths continue to swirl around Elizabeth Short. Her death at age 22 has spawned endless Byzantine theories. What fuels the enduring fascination? Like Jack the Ripper, there's an evocative moniker. There's an undercurrent of sex. There is a degree of real savagery. And there is a lack of resolution. From LA Times Studios, this is Crimes of the Times. I'm Christopher Goffard. People know Elizabeth Short's face now from a few surviving images. Some of them have an air of glamour and aspiration, but poverty hangs over her whole life story. She was born in Boston, a child of the Great Depression. She was a young girl when her father abandoned her, her 4 sisters, and her mother. She had terrible asthma and missed a lot of school. For a while, she worked as a waitress and cashier. In her 20s, her teeth were badly decayed, and she used candle wax to fill the cavities. It's what people did when they could not afford a dentist. She did not come to Southern California to pursue a dream of movie stardom. She came out here to be with a man, but the relationship ended, and she spent a lot of time drifting between neighborhoods and temporary friendships. She shared a place with an aspiring actress at one point, and she used the woman's anecdotes as her own.
If you met Elizabeth Short and you told her that something happened, she would incorporate that as if it had happened to her.
This is Larry Harnish, a former LA Times copy editor who has become an expert on the case. We were outside getting coffee.
She would get dressed and leave the house in the morning as if she was going to work out in the valley someplace. She would come home. She would have stories about her day at work and all that, but it was totally fictional. None of it was real. And that's one of the things that really made the investigation difficult.
Elizabeth Short was often angling for meals and rides and telling stories meant to win sympathy. Sometimes she portrayed herself as a war widow. Sometimes she said she'd lost a child. She dated military men, officers, not enlisted men. Sometimes she slept in an all-night movie theater.
She would put on this act as if she was from a very fine Boston family, and she was shocked at the way they do things out here. She doesn't fit in a normal template, and people have a hard time with that. It's much easier to understand the aspiring actress. We know that type. Somebody who is off and on homeless and in and out of touch with reality, that's a little bit harder sell. I think there's more depth than just being a scammer. I think she kind of wanted to believe some of that stuff.
She had no permanent address when a traveling salesman picked her up in San Diego in January 1947. The man drove her to the bus station in downtown Los Angeles. She dropped off her suitcases there and asked the man to take her to the Biltmore Hotel. She said she was meeting her sister there. This was a lie. Her sister was out of town. Elizabeth Short parted ways with the salesman, and she was last seen leaving the hotel. Her body was spotted a few days later by a woman pushing a stroller down Norton Avenue in Leimert Park. At first, police thought it was a mannequin. She was posed flat on her back, naked. The mouth was sliced ear to ear. The body had been drained of blood, and it was in two parts, neatly severed between the second and third lumbar vertebrae. The lead detective suspected that a skilled surgeon had to be responsible. In 1947, 4 Los Angeles newspapers were in fierce competition for scoops. Because of the mutilation, the headlines were calling it a werewolf killing. The first challenge was to identify the victim. A now-defunct newspaper called the Los Angeles Examiner got the victim's fingerprints from police and transmitted them to the FBI. It turned out Elizabeth Short's prints were on file because she had been arrested in Santa Barbara for underage drinking a few years earlier. The LA Examiner led the coverage, and its news-gathering practices could be ugly even by the standards of the day. An Examiner reporter called Elizabeth Short's mother to get some background information for an article. The mother did not know her daughter was dead, and the reporter pretended Elizabeth had won a beauty contest to get what he needed out of her. Only then did he deliver the terrible news. Soon afterward, the Examiner received a postcard believed to be from Elizabeth Short's killer. It was signed Black Dahlia Avenger, but it had been rubbed with petroleum to destroy evidence. It did not yield any fingerprints. One of the myths about Elizabeth Short is that she was promiscuous or even a prostitute. In a fictionalized imagining of her life by the novelist John Gregory Dunn, she's nicknamed the Virgin Tramp. But a different profile was emerging as police interviewed people who'd known her. Police discovered that she had had brief encounters with a lot of men, but almost all of them insisted they had been non-sexual encounters.
I like to say that she, rather than having a lot of dates, she had one date over and over again. It was the same date. It was not even a one-night stand. It was a one afternoon, buy dinner, buy lunch, and then she would get rid of them.
The lead detective called her a tease. He said, quote, "She probably went too far this time and just set some guy off into a blind, berserk rage." You can find that same combination of disdain and disapproval in some of the popular accounts of the case. One of the most famous came out 11 years after the slaying in a 1958 book called The Badge by Jack Webb. This is, by the way, what fueled young James Ellroy's obsession with the case, and he'd go on to write the novel The Black Dahlia, in which he imagines a lost and exploited Elizabeth Short appearing in a porn film. Here's what Jack Webb said about Elizabeth Short. "She was a lazy girl and irresponsible. At 21, when she should have been starting married life or maybe a modest career, she was already obsolescent. To the sociologist, she is the typical unfortunate depression child who matured too suddenly in her teens into the easy money, easy living, easy loving of wartime America." But to the criminologist, Webb continued, "Her tortured, severed body is an eerie blend of Poe and Freud." The language here gives us a look at the obsessions of the time. It highlights attitudes about the transformation of American women who had found independence in the World War II economy and expected to keep it.
She was vilified by Webb and many others.
I'm talking to Ann Redding, who teaches the Black Dahlia case in a class called The Study of Murder at Santa Barbara City College. She tells me that one of the biggest characters influencing the mythos of this case is post-war Los Angeles.
Post-World War II Los Angeles, the country as a whole, but perhaps Los Angeles even more so than other places because so many of our soldiers were returning from the Pacific Theater into the LA area, and they just didn't. They stayed.
After the war, women were supposed to go back to being wives and moms.
There was definitely an uptick in misogyny, a strong societal push for women to stop working, and the whole idea of Rosie the Riveter and so forth, careers outside the home, that came to a screeching halt, and they were expected to return to being the ideal housewife. There were job discrimination, so they'd be fired or they'd be demoted to the lower classes. Their pay would be cut. And so for women who maybe for the first time in their lives had found a sense of independence and a sense of autonomy and worth outside being a wife, that all disappeared.
Elizabeth Short had a rose tattoo on her leg, which Redding sees as a sign of her independence. It was an uncommonly daring gesture for a woman in the 1940s.
I think that speaks to a kind of adventurous, some people might even term a bit of wild side in her, a little bit of risky, a little bit of edge play perhaps. I find that element alone is an indication of a side of her personality that she kept pretty well hidden for all intents and purposes. So yeah, the misogyny, she was right in the thick of it when she disappeared, and her perceived lifestyle was used to vilify her reputation in some of the most disturbing ways.
In her classes, Professor Redding tries to show students how Elizabeth Short's past made her vulnerable, how her father abandoned her family when she was 6, how terrible asthma curtailed her education, and how she never recovered from the 1945 death of a man she loved, a military pilot named Matt Gordon, who died in a plane crash. Redding says her ability to cope with the world and take care of herself deteriorated.
Elizabeth was absolutely devastated. She'd just turned 21 years old.
After the pilot's death, Redding says, there's no record that Elizabeth Short ever had another job.
And in 16 months, she'd be murdered.
Hi, I'm Jonathan, one of the producers for Crimes of the Times. Before I became a dad, I thought I knew what tired felt like. But let me tell you, sleep deprivation hits differently when you're juggling a newborn and a full-time job. Proper sleep is the foundation of whole body health. It increases focus, boosts energy, and improves your mood. That's why we're so excited to talk about Beam's Dream Powder, a science-backed, healthy hot cocoa for sleep. I've tried other sleep aids, but Dream is different. It's delicious. My go-to is the cinnamon cocoa, and totally guilt-free with only 15 calories and 0 grams of sugar. Other sleep aids can cause next-day grogginess, but Dream contains a powerful, all-natural blend of reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. I just mix Dream with hot water and enjoy before bed. It's that easy. If you want to try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder, get up to 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/crimes and use code CRIMES at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/crimes and use code CRIMES for up to 40% off.
It's sort of very similar as to being a foster parent. You go in it not for the length of time, but to know that even 2 months or 10 years can still create a big impact in a child's life. So CASA is a nonprofit organization that stands for Court-Appointed Special Advocate, and they specialize in making sure that the child's needs are met, whether it's medical, health, educational, and ensuring that the child is receiving the most stability they can.
Where was Elizabeth Short going when she left the Biltmore Hotel the night she disappeared? As Professor Ann Redding puts it, she was a high-risk victim in a high-risk situation.
Depression, unemployment, low economic status. She was alone. It was late at night. She's literally homeless, no money, and yet she's an attractive, well-dressed young woman, but she's was known to approach strangers for all manner of favors, car rides, meals, or what have you.
Redding thinks maybe Elizabeth Short was returning to the bus station, a place where she knew she could find a bench and sleep through the night without too much fear of harassment. But to get there, she might have taken a dangerous route. Right across the street from the hotel was Pershing Square. If you look at photos and postcards from the late 40s, you can see it was dense with tropical foliage, a 5-acre maze of trees in the middle of the big city. After dark, it was a place notorious to the vice squad.
At the time, Pershing Square, it was a heavily wooded green park, and on different corners of the park, there were access areas for the trolleys and public transportations. And so if one were to wonder if she did that on her way to the bus station or wherever she was going, I think the possibilities are fairly unlimited as to what might have happened to her. I do feel that one of the things that separates out the so-called Black Dahlia murder is any other murder case that I can think of. Jack the Ripper, the BTK killer. The nicknames, if you will, are always about the actual killer. The Black Dahlia murder case is the only unsolved case I can think about where the nickname is all about the victim.
She says Elizabeth Short's death has the characteristics of a lust murder, and that she believes the person responsible was not a serial killer.
It speaks to me, somebody who had a significant amount of emotional disintegration, and I would think it's likely that shortly after this murder was committed, that the person would have become incapacitated in some time, whether that was being institutionalized, perhaps even in a mental institution, maybe suicide. But I just haven't seen anything that I find personally persuasive that this individual had killed before or killed after.
This is another thing that people hate to hear, one of a kind. And that's from the original detectives. He never killed before, he never killed again. It was one off. And people, oh God, especially the armchair sleuths, they have to attach it to all these other killings in LA in the 40s, and it's one of a kind. That's a hard sell.
Larry Harnish began researching the case seriously in the late 1990s for a 50th anniversary story. He is now arguably the world's top authority on the case. He says the battle for accuracy is never ending.
I don't do interviews anymore. I'm fed up with the true crime industrial complex. The case is so polluted with crackpot theories and stupid books.
Harnish energetically debunks theories and random stories I've heard about the Black Dahlia case before I can even get them out. I remember a story that David Lynch would tell about sitting down with
That's all bullshit.
Detective number 1, John St. John.
Totally bullshit, and I'll tell you how I know that.
Let me finish the story.
I know what the story is. I've just been fighting with social media over the story.
Harnish says that one of the most persistent myths depicts Elizabeth Short as an aspiring starlet, quote, sleeping her way across Tinseltown. In this portrayal, she was the starstruck moth who comes to Hollywood and gets burned by the Hollywood flame and finds in death the fame she didn't find in life. Harnish says this is far from reality.
People don't want the record set straight. People want this grab bag of film noir tropes about the femme fatale. And it's kind of like, if you're familiar with the movie A Star is Born, where you have this starstruck young girl from back east who comes to big bad LA, and bad things happen, and it's always this line, achieving in death the fame that she had wanted all her life.
Where was she living when she died?
We don't know,
You don't know where she was living?
because she was missing the last week of her life. And I think that's really the sad thing about Elizabeth Short. Was she is somebody who could disappear for almost a week and nobody noticed.
Harnish does not believe there is a single factually reliable book about the case, and he is disdainful of many well-publicized theories. In one book, the killer is a bellhop. In another, a Skid Row alcoholic. In a third, the killer is gangster Bugsy Siegel acting at the behest of an LA Times publisher who had supposedly impregnated Elizabeth Short. In a fourth book, the killer is Orson Welles, linked to the crime because he once sawed a woman in half in a magic trick. In one of the most popular books, Steve Hodell's Black Dahlia Avenger, the murderer is the author's father, a dashing doctor who ran a venereal disease clinic. Harnish compares this theory to seeing Jesus on a tortilla. Your feeling is there's never been a good Dahlia book.
No, the best thing you can do is not read any of them because you'll have to unlearn everything.
What does Harnish himself believe? During his research, he came across a suspect that generations of detectives had overlooked.
Hi, my name is Mary, and I'm one of the producers of this show. I want to take a quick second to tell you about Quince. With Quince, I get high-end, versatile pieces at prices I can afford. Quince has all the must-haves like Mongolian cashmere crewneck sweaters from $50, iconic 100% leather jackets, and versatile flow-knit activewear. By partnering directly with top factories, Quince cuts out the cost of the middleman and passes the savings on to us. And Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices, along with premium fabrics and finishes. I own the Mongolian cashmere cardigan, and it's one of the softest items in my closet. I swear I've worn this like twice a week since getting it. Indulge in affordable luxury. Go to quince.com/crimesofthetime for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/crimesofthetime to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/crimesofthetime. Hi, my name is Mary, and I'm one of the producers of Crimes of the Times. I wanted to take a quick second to talk about a product called Lumen. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs and gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workouts, sleep, and even stress management. It's a new year, and if you're like me, you might be inspired to get a little healthier. Lumen can help with this. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism, whether you're burning mostly fats or carbs. Optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, better sleep, etc. Having my Lumen has really helped me track this stuff and stay in line with my New Year goals. Take the next step to improving your health. Go to lumen.me/crimesofthetimes to get 20% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/crimesofthetimes for 20% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode.
A former FBI profiler, John Douglas, told Harnish that there was meaning in the Lamert Park neighborhood where Short's body was found. Why did the killer choose a much-traveled stretch of Norton Avenue? Why not dump the body in the desert or mountains? The profiler believed the killer must have had a link to the LA neighborhood.
He said whoever killed her wanted to put the fear of God in that neighborhood.
So Harnish did some digging and found something detectives had missed. Elizabeth Short did have a connection to the area. Her sister knew someone who lived there, a 66-year-old man named Walter Bailey. He and his estranged wife lived a block from the crime scene. Something stood out about Bailey. At the time of Elizabeth Short's murder, he had been suffering from a brain lesion that had dramatically changed his personality. Something else jumped out. Bailey was a surgeon. He would have had the skill to bisect the body. His office was just blocks from the Biltmore downtown. Maybe Short had emerged from the Biltmore that night and sought his help. Maybe she told the sob story about losing a child, not knowing that Bailey's own son actually had been killed by a truck. Maybe this enraged him.
He's got the connection to the neighborhood. He's got the sort of the mental disintegration. Then you've got the connection between the two families. His daughter knew her sister. Of all the people who've been put forward, Walter Bailey actually had the skill to do what was done to her. He was a very respectable doctor. He was chief of staff at County Hospital. But, at the end of his life, it really unraveled.
Redding says she thinks there's weight to Harnish's suspect.
And it's pretty clear through the coroner's report, through the statements of the LAPD detectives, that this wasn't just a surgeon, this was a very skilled. And so that's Walter Bailey. There are also characterizations of the meticulousness in which the body was scrubbed of evidence, the kind of taunting of the police, if you believe that the killer did do those things, the ability to completely successfully get away with it with no attention ever been brought to them. Walter Bailey, being an older man with an older man's patience, an older man's control, and certainly his knowledge, he could have pulled all of those things off pretty easily.
Bailey does check more boxes than other suspects, but Harnish avoids any definitive statements about his guilt.
Because you can't just go pick some random guy and say, oh yeah, obviously he did it. That's what everybody does. No, I mean, I'm a journalist. It's like, okay, if this is what we know that he checks some boxes, he doesn't check all the boxes.
Dr. Walter Bailey died a year after Elizabeth Short's murder. I was not able to locate any living relatives to interview.
So we went back to 1960, and I found there were about 9,000 unsolved homicides in Los Angeles from 1960 up through 2001.
David Lampkin is a retired LAPD detective. He examined the case as head of the LAPD's cold case unit in 2001. It was not considered a high priority because the chances of prosecuting anyone were near zero.
Needless to say, we had our hands full with our pick of cases, and, we had a relatively small unit, and then we had to start screening all those cases to see which ones were most viable to get us solved. That case did come up just because of the notoriety, and pretty much all the physical evidence was gone from that case.
Though Harnish and Redding and others have worked hard to shed light on the complexities of Elizabeth Short's life, the story is often still received as a grim cautionary tale about the dark side of Hollywood ambition. Part of the power of that narrative is that the entertainment industry, in more prosaic ways, is its own horror story.
I worked Hollywood for a long time. You see so many young people and young women coming there with stars in their eyes and have these dreams of making it in Hollywood. And unfortunately, in so many instances, this gets derailed and sidetracked, and, they end up having their dreams shattered, which, of course, puts them in a bad place mentally and just opens them up for all kinds of bad things to happen in their life.
David Lampkin does not think most of the Black Dahlia theories have much going for them either.
There's problems with all of them, but of the ones I saw, I liked Harnish's the best. Harnish could actually connect his suspect to that location. In my opinion, that case will never get solved, barring some weird thing happening, like someone's cleaning out a basement or attic and they find some journal that belonged to somebody who lived in the house, decades before, and there's some sort of reference to it.
From LA Times Studios, this is Crimes of the Times. To read more about these cases, check out Crimes of the Times at latimes.com. We also have a link to our video episodes in the show notes. This episode was written and reported by me, your host, Christopher Goffard. Our showrunner and senior producer is Jacqueline Kim. Producers are Mary Knopf and Jonathan Shiflett, with additional sound design by Jonathan Shiflett. Executive editor is Deborah Anderlew. Associate producer is Jordan Patterson. Video editing by Cooper Kenward. Production services provided by JTB Studios. Our camera technicians and operators are Jeff Amlott, Julia McCabe, and Jason Newbert, with additional production support from Andrew Gombert, Patrick Stewart, and Anne-Marie Hauser. Denise Callahan is our studio manager. Ben Church is our production manager. Special thanks to LA Times Studios President Anna Magzanian, President and Chief Operating Officer of the Los Angeles Times, Chris Argenteri, and Executive Editor of the Los Angeles Times, Terry Tang. Crimes of the Times is executive produced and co-created by Darius Derrickson and me, Christopher Goffard.